we already have all of our TypeScript stuff set up thanks to Code Sandbox. Shout out to those guys, man. This product is so good. If you don't pay for it and you use it on a normal basis, I encourage you to go and support them. It's a wonderful company, wonderful product. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what we'll do example wise. I think I want to take their docs example of just the increment decrement first and do that, even though it's kind of a wash in terms of like you're never going to build that. Just so we can follow their patterns and see if we can add in some TypeScript. So I'm literally going to take this entire thing from the docs and just dump it right in here. And I'll add in my imports in here. So this is using UseReducer. And again, let me know if the typing and stuff is too loud when it comes through in the recording. I have my headphones plugged in and it kind of sounds loud, but it's hard to tell. So the first thing here is I want to add a reducer state and a reducer action, I think. And we could convert this to an arrow function if we wanted to, and that way we could have just like a type for the whole reducer function. I kind of prefer just standard old functions most of the time. I don't mind having to declare my stuff a little more explicitly. So we'll put in our state, and the state here is an object with count, then count is a number. So let's outline that. And then these actions, like normally, right? These actions have a action.type and action, like usually, like action.payload is what we're used to doing from the Redux side of things. So I think that that's what we still want to do here. We want to say type is increment and decrement. And then payload is going to be, and we can type this really specifically in this circumstance, is going to be a number. All right, so we drop that guy in, and now this is typed. This has no errors here. And like if I tried to do another case here, you'll notice that like I only get these two actions, which is kind of, whoops, what we want. Okay, and then I'm assuming this guy's gonna have some types too. Yeah, so there's some generics we can pass into this. If you're unfamiliar with what generics are, generics basically let you pass types in as values here. So you can say like, I mean these are terrible examples because you wouldn't add generics to these, but if I was to, right, I could say like, and usually you prefix with a T. So like T actions, and then you could pass in that. Think of it as like passing in almost like an argument, but through this generic. And then over here, it's going to underline here because this is where we would put in like this guy, right? But again, that's silly. We don't need generics in this case. But we do use generics a lot for libraries, which is why they have them set up here so that we can pass in our types and make sure that we get everything set up properly. Yeah, so if we look in here, you'll see that there is basically a function that has the same arguments as our reducer, and then it returns. Oh wait, that is ours right now. This is not confusing at all. See, there's 4 overloads, which means there's different like ways you can do this, and you can put in different pieces, and it'll type each one as separate use cases. So the question is like, what are all those use cases, right? The other piece to type here is that initial state really needs to be typed as our reducer state. And then let's just see what this is yelling about. Argument of type decrement is not assignable to a type reducer action. Oh, because payload isn't there. Right, so like technically we don't even have payloads. I guess that's true. This one doesn't have payloads. So I don't doesn't it seems like they infer a lot. We don't actually need to pass a generic in. We can just type our reducer and then drop it in, which actually makes this whole thing simpler. I thought you were going to have to pass in some generics here. So this can actually be a whole lot shorter of a little bit of a stream here. Yeah, so then we should be able to just drop this guy in here. And now we have this counter. And if I try to dispatch, let's say, a different action, so this is like delete, it'll yell at us and be like, hey, that's not a type. The only ones you can assign are increment and decrement, which is good. So that's nice. It also helps just for typos and things like that. Now the question is, a lot of people from the Redux world used to use like constants basically, like a fully uppercase variable that was a string. The value is a string, and that's what they used to use for these types. And so you used to have like action types, right? So if we wanted to split this down further, we could kind of follow that model, but on the TypeScript side. And what I'm meaning by that is like the way that we literally used to do this was it'd be like const um God, there's so many different ways to do this. People used to do stuff like this where they'd be like increment, and this would be like increment. They do stuff like that. I've also seen people just do it directly on here, and this is like increment here, and then you pass this guy down into here, and then you can just use that down here, right? But we kind of don't need that anymore because of these literal strings. It enforces which one we're going to use, and so typoing and things like that kind of just goes out the window. It's not really even a problem anymore. But let's just say that we wanted to like not have this be part of our reducer action, right? Um, and maybe we want to make these things more generic, right? Like maybe no pun intended there. Although that's exactly what we're about to do here. Like let's say that you wanted to be able to pass in other bits of data whenever you wanted, right? So let's make this an interface first because that's probably makes more sense so we can extend it. And then we'll add a generic here and we'll say T types. Okay. And now do that. Down here, we need to pass a generic in, right? So I'm going to create a new interface and I will call this or a new type, and I'll call this actions, and it's going to be increment and decrement, just like what we had before. And then now I can just pass in, let's make that make more sense, T actions. Yeah, and now we can just pass in our actions. And this is kind of nice. Like if you were using reducers all over the place, you wouldn't have to deal with all the other stuff there. And then we could also even say here like T payload and the default value. This is how you set default values. I could say T payload equals unknown for starters because we don't know what the type is. In this one, we actually don't even care about it. And I'm going to say it's optional for right now. And then if you were going to do something that wasn't an increment decrement example where you were going to pass a payload, you could do like one of two things, right? You could say, um, I'm gonna I'm gonna make a new interface, and I can extend reducer action and then pass in my increment and decrement, right? And then I can add other pieces to it, right? The problem with this model and the kind of the whole issue with adding a generic for like payload, for example, is that this is saying that it's this question mark here is, if you're not familiar, is basically saying that like this is an optional key in this type, and that's not really what we want here. We actually don't want a payload. And so what I think is probably a better idea is just to leave it as this. And then if somebody wanted to add payload, right, they simply just come in here and they add in payload and say like, okay, payload has to be a number, right? Because maybe we want to add another one that's called set, right? Something like that. And we could also do this all in line too. So like I could take this actions and then say payload number. Okay, and then now if we said like I'm gonna add a new one and this is gonna be set return if you don't give me a payload, then let's throw a new error and just say in here like payload required for action type set. Okay, and then I typoed. Okay, and then we would say here return count. So on one line like the other ones. Count is state is action dot payload, and we're just going to set it directly. And then now if we came down here and we said like, okay, let's do an input type number, which I know these aren't necessarily good for accessibility, but for our purposes this will work. And let's hold that value in here real quick. Whoops. Use state. So for this, we're gonna say it is undefined by default, and then we're gonna say here our state for this is gonna be called set number. Set number. We'll just say num. Okay, and then down here we're gonna do an on change. And we'll do set num is e dot target dot value. That's number. We're going to say this is a number or undefined. And then this number now, if I put a new button here and I say on click, this is going to dispatch type set with a payload of num. And we're going to say set. All right, so now if I typed in here that hit set, boom, that sets our state, and then I can increment from there. And really, I guess I kind of want, no, that works for this example. So this all works great, and we have now that's up there, a typed reducer. Cool, thanks for watching.